What do Kaiser Wilhelm II, Prince Albert of Monaco, King Edward VII, and Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich have in common? Well, at one point or another, La Belle Otero managed to lure them into her bed. Famed for her beauty and skills between the sheets, La Belle Otero made a fortune off of rich men that lusted after her, and she wasn't afraid to talk about them either. After she seduced Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, she revealed his very dirty secret. But we'll get to that in a bit. In the small Spanish village of Balga, a poor peasant woman gave birth to a little girl by the name of Agustina del Carmen Otero Iglesias, better known today as Carolina La Belle Otero. She was the second child out of 7, all with different fathers. With so many mouths to feed, Otero and her family didn't have much in the way of money. She did, however, have her dignity, but a tragic event took that away from her too. La Belle Otero was only 11 years old when a horrific event altered the course of her life. While walking in the woods near the village, the local shoemaker assaulted the little girl. Using every bit of willpower left in her body, La Belle Otero crawled home. Despite the care and attention she received, the horrible event changed her, and just a year later, at the age of 12, Otero left the village entirely. She was on her own. When La Belle Otero left her village, she was completely broke. To survive, Otero did the only thing she could do to keep herself warm and fed. She sold her body. For 2 years, she wandered from village to village. Then, in the summer of 1882, she arrived in Barcelona, where she met the man that took her life in an unexpected direction. The stories of how La Belle Otero met Paco, a professional dancer, vary wildly, but here's the story that's most likely the truth. To avoid being caught in the cold and rain, Otero snuck into a dingy little bar. Miserable and in tears, Otero was just about to get as comfy as she could when Paco stumbled upon her. Paco took La Belle Otero in, gave her clean clothes, food, a warm place to stay, and they soon became lovers. Eventually, Paco taught Otero how to dance. These lessons honed Otero's beauty into a deadly weapon, and it utterly bewitched the men around her. Paco, seeing an opportunity, proposed a deal to Otero that saved her from a life of poverty. The deal Paco proposed was simple. He would provide La Belle Otero with a steady stream of clients, income, and a sense of security. In exchange, Otero would entertain men in cabarets all over Spain. From roughly 1883 to 1889, Otero made a good living as a nomadic dancer, until Paco screwed her over. At this point, La Belle Otero was becoming rather famous. Her dancing improved considerably, and she even sang. The cabarets she performed at were becoming increasingly classy, and the clients she entertained were no longer just anyone that offered her food and shelter. Instead, her clients now consisted of mayors and other well-off patrons. Then, in 1889, Paco did something that completely shattered their relationship. Unfortunately, he went and fell in love with her, and her flow of clients stopped completely. You see, Paco wasn't content with sharing La Belle Otero anymore. He wanted her to marry him, abandon her career, and become a loving housewife. Otero was decidedly uninterested in his suggestion. And honestly, she didn't really need him anyway. After all, she was the one bringing in all the income. Realizing that she had outgrown Paco, Otero was ready to leave him. Then, fate handed her a solo career on a silver platter. La Belle Otero was dancing at a modest little cabaret in Marseille when she crossed paths with a man named Ernest Andre Jorgens. Jorgens was an experienced theater manager known for finding and booking quality acts. When he set his eyes on Otero, though, all of his professionalism and experience flew right out the window. He was completely entranced by Otero's beauty. Otero, for her part, saw him as her one-way ticket to freedom. And after just one night together, not only did Jorgens sign the relatively unknown dancer for a long-term theater contract, but he even agreed to give her top billing. With her future secured, Otero ditched Paco, left for Paris with Jorgens, and prepared herself for a life as an international star. By late 1889, La Belle Otero arrived in Paris, ready to become the best performer the world had ever seen. Unfortunately, she discovered that stardom would not come easily to her. For one, her assigned theater coach, Bellini, thought of her as a talentless hack. Jorgens had to pay through the nose for Otero's coaching sessions. For another, Otero was unknown to most on the international stage. Jorgens was about to change all that. In preparation for La Belle Otero's debut in New York, Jorgens turned on the hype machine for her arrival. Within months, people were clamoring for Otero, the mysterious Spanish beauty and international queen of the dance. People speculated wildly about her past, which both Jorgens and Otero encouraged. By the time she actually stepped onto the stage on October 1st, 1890, expectations were impossibly high. Otero could not afford to fail. La Belle Otero knocked that performance out of the park. Several major New York newspapers raved about her. The New York Times wrote that she appears to dance all over. Every muscle, from her dainty toes to the crown of her head, is brought into play, and the consequent contortions are wonderful and, at times, startling. Loved by critics and audiences alike, Otero was now a star, and her fortunes were about to change in a big way. From her debut onwards, her shows sold out night after night in New York. In fact, every major theater in the US wanted her on their stage. She made powerful friends who indulged her with expensive gifts and jewels. One patron alone showed Otero almost $250,000 worth of jewels. It's just too bad that not everyone was happy with Otero's success. As her success and fame grew, La Belle Otero began to drift away from Jorgens. Although Otero still treasured him as a friend and capable manager, Jorgens wanted more. To win back her love, he lavished her with increasingly expensive gifts, while plunging deeper and deeper into debt. And then he went too far. Eventually, Jorgens began embezzling money from the theater he worked at. Sadly, his efforts to win the heart of La Belle Otero were for naught. La Belle Otero, being the enterprising young lady she was, discovered that men were willing to pay her insane amounts of money for just one night in bed with her. Her dancing and singing was a good way to advertise her presence, but the real money was made after the show, where she entertained men that could afford her prices. Jorgens was unable to bear the thought of Otero being with other men, so he left. She was on her own. As it turned out, La Belle Otero did just fine on her own. In 1892, she reached St. Petersburg, where she continued to dance for the public and entertain wealthy men at their private parties. It was at these private parties where Otero truly made her fortune. For a wild price, anyone with the clout and coin could hire Otero for the wildest night of their life. And, of course, La Belle Otero made sure their night was worth her price. While in St. Petersburg, a wealthy colonel hired La Belle Otero for a private party attended by rich nobles and officers alike. Otero agreed to attend, and her entrance was so wild, it's unforgettable. 8 men carried her to the party on a 6-foot-long silver tray, much to the astonishment of the partygoers. One nobleman was so entranced by her beauty that he gifted her 1,000,000 rubles, and he begged her not to leave him. His begging didn't keep her in the city for long, however. A couple of months and over 1,000,000 rubles later, the wandering dancer moved on. In late August of 1892, La Belle Otero returned to Paris. She used her newly acquired funds to set up shop in the Étoile district and even managed to book shows at the famed Cirque d'été, a prestigious vaudeville house. She performed at the classy establishment for a short 2 weeks, much to the delight of the theatergoers. At the end of her run, Otero moved on to perform for another establishment, but her act became decidedly more risqué. The establishment that La Belle Otero performed at was the Bal Tabarin. The Bal Tabarin was a pleasure palace famous for its fishing game. In this game, the gentleman would dangle pieces of gingerbread on a line from a balcony over the dance floor, and any girl who was interested tugged on the line as an invitation to dance. It was during one of these games where a very, very rich man literally hooked onto Otero. That man's name was Albert, Prince of Monaco. La Belle Otero knew immediately that this man would be the next to add to her fortune, and quickly got ready to do what she did best. Despite Albert's painful awkwardness in the bedroom, La Belle Otero managed to capture his heart. Albert was happy for others to see him with his new, beautiful mistress, and she was happy to take the apartment and expensive jewels that Albert offered her. Even years later, she still managed to describe every jewel she received from him with pinpoint accuracy. In 1894, La Belle Otero went on tour, which put a pause on the budding relationship between herself and Albert. This didn't mean that she put a pause on seducing the other men she met along the way, however. While performing in Cairo, Otero met with the viceroy, who gifted her an enormous diamond ring, worth 500,000 francs, after she stayed with him for 3 days. After La Belle Otero returned to Paris, she met His Serene Highness Prince Nicholas of Montenegro. He was immediately taken in by her grace, beauty, and charm, of course, and the two began a relationship. But there was a bizarre twist. Prince Nicholas actually moved into the apartment shared by Otero and Prince Albert of Monaco. In case it wasn't clear, very few men ever got under La Belle Otero's skin. But a traveling Prussian strongman named Sando was one of the exceptions. While performing in London, Otero caught wind of the fact that Sando was also performing in the city. That was when she made her move. She sent him a note requesting that he visit her. His lack of a reply shocked her, but she remained undeterred. If he wasn't going to come to her, she would go to him. One evening, La Belle Otero cut her performance short and raced to intercept Sando in his dressing room. When Sando entered his dressing room after the show, Otero's presence flattered him, but her charms had little effect on him. Frustrated, she made up a bold lie. She invited him to a supper party at her hotel. Sando naively agreed, and Otero practically skipped back to the hotel to prepare for his arrival. Sando was in for a surprise. La Belle Otero obviously had no supper party planned. When he arrived at her hotel, all he found was Otero dressed to the nines. After an hour or two of unsuccessful attempts to seduce Sando, Otero sent him off in a huff. Otero's ability to judge men wasn't always on point, but that wasn't true when it came to her ability to judge other women. Throughout her career, La Belle Otero successfully trained women she deemed worthy in the art of dance and seduction. In 1896, Otero was drinking at a bar when she noticed a woman named Lisette. For the next 4 weeks, La Belle Otero taught Lisette everything she knew: how to dress, how to walk, how to act, how to use makeup, and of course, how to satisfy men. Needless to say, Otero's training was a resounding success. Unfortunately, her own successes were beginning to run dry. La Belle Otero's next tour took her to Italy. Having seen so much success in New York, Paris, London, and more, Otero was confident that Italy would receive her with the same warmth. Their actual reaction to her performance shocked the dancer to her core. The audiences hated her performance. To make matters worse, in the early morning of December 29th, 1896, La Belle Otero heard a faint knocking on her hotel door. It was Jorgens, her ex-manager who had been trying to see her for days. Overcome by pity at Jorgens' sorry state, she tried to lend him a hand, but her attempt ended in tragedy. Since La Belle Otero was still entertaining her guest, she asked Jorgens to return later. Jorgens answered her with a strange silence, but she thought little of it at the time. Instead, she turned around to grab her purse, thinking he might need financial aid. When she turned back to the door, Jorgens was gone. Otero didn't know it, but that was the last time she would ever see him. For La Belle Otero, the loss of Jorgens was a disastrous blow to her career. Unsurprisingly, no one was in a hurry to book La Belle Otero after her disastrous tour in Italy. Well, it's a good thing that she had another hobby to occupy her time. She next set her sights on King Edward VII, then called Dirty Birdie. But it wasn't easy. Most of his time was occupied by another mistress, who just happened to be wildly jealous. But even when she had one powerful suitor, La Belle Otero had her eyes on the next rung up the ladder. Take, for example, her affair with Russia's Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, and, reportedly, his brother, Grand Duke Peter. They were great catches, but if you can believe it, she actually had the gall to ask Nikolai for an introduction to Tsar Nicholas II. She began an affair with the Tsar, and spent some time at the great theaters of Russia. She seemed genuinely fond of him, but she also described his timid, frightened nature, and also revealed his literally dirty secret. He had rank body odor. As she put it, he really stank. La Belle Otero hopped from royal to royal, all of whom were more than happy to pay the dancer for her company. She needed the jewels they lavished upon her too, especially since she developed a particularly bad habit. That habit was gambling, and it stemmed from one particular adrenaline-pumping night. Otero first discovered gambling at Le Rêve, a gambling hall in Paris. That night, Otero experienced a serious case of beginner's luck. She won round after round at the gambling tables. By the morning, she managed to turn 10 francs into 395,000 francs. On November 10th, 1898, Prince Albert made the shocking decision to take La Belle Otero to Monaco with him. She knew this was a mistake, but had little choice. When she stepped foot into Monaco, her worst fears came true. Prince Albert's wife had local authorities take Otero to the border and kicked her out of the country. Just a year later, though, the country begged for her to return for an unbelievable reason. You see, Otero spent so much money gambling that her banishment actually put a dent into Monaco's economy. When she wasn't gambling, Otero continued to tour and entertain men, earning a pretty penny along the way. Still, it wasn't enough. By 1901, she managed to spend every last bit of cash she earned. She needed a miracle, and she needed one soon. 3 very important men came to La Belle Otero's rescue. The Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, King Nicholas I of Montenegro, and a wealthy American man. They set her up in a 4-story stone house in France, where she lived for the next 7 years. Otero knew she couldn't rely on just her good looks forever, though. She needed a way to make herself stand out above the other women in her industry. With this thought in mind, Otero made her next daring move. On April 30th, 1902, La Belle Otero took to the air in a hot air balloon, shocking the public. Few men, and even fewer women, had ascended into the air on a hot air balloon before, so Otero's airborne adventure became the talk of the town for weeks. Soon after, she ascended again, with a man named Baron Lepic. According to Otero, the two became members of the Mile High Club. Despite this daring feat, Otero was slowly becoming a joke to the public, all for a very unfair reason. Simply put, La Belle Otero was aging. In 1903, she was only 34, hardly old at all, but the Parisian public thought otherwise. During her shows, cries of, "Hello, Grandma! How's your poor old bones?" came at her from all the members of the audience. It was clear that Otero needed to change her career if she wanted success. But who would be willing to lend her a hand? In 1905, a man named Paul Frank made a startling suggestion to La Belle Otero. Why not learn how to act? After giving it some thought, Otero gave it a go and found, to her surprise, that she was a fine actress. It was a total game changer. From Paris to Madrid, critics celebrated her acting and showered her with praise. Otero remained unsatisfied though. All this time, she had a burning passion unrevealed to the world. Her true passion was to sing opera, which she revealed to the public in early 1909. La Belle Otero spent several years training before taking on the role of a lifetime. She played Carmen in the famous opera of the same name. Although she only got to play as Carmen twice, audiences and critics loved her. Not bad at all for a 43-year-old. Having gotten her wish, Otero was ready to retire. But her final days were bittersweet. From her retirement to her last days, La Belle Otero spent nearly all her money at the casinos. With only a couple hundred francs to her name, Otero lived out the rest of her life in increasing states of poverty, but still managed to eke out a relatively normal life. When the end came for her, it was April 10th, 1965. La Belle Otero lived to the ripe old age of 97 years old, nearly a century. There's no doubt that during that time, she easily packed in enough scandal, action, and heartbreak for 5 centuries or more. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. We also invite you to check out the companion article in the description below. If you want to see even more videos on historical figures, please subscribe to the channel.